Hey, what's up, guys? It's your boy Matt here, and we back with another episode of Matter of Fact MMA. So today we're going to be getting into a couple of things. We're going to be talking about Jake Paul and Nate Diaz, as well as we're going to be talking about the main event matchup between Cory Sandhagen versus Rob Font, and also a little bit about that co-main event. And then I'm going to touch on something about promotion. So let's start out with Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz. This is what I think was really interesting about this fight. I know I did a video, you can go back and check it out. I did another video about, is Paul versus Diaz good, or is it just meh? Meh. That's a good little noise for you. So after seeing the fight, seeing what went on, during the fight and after the fight, this is my final take on it. Was it a good fight based out of boxing skill level, boxing expertise, if you will? I would say no in that instance. Was it a pretty good fight overall, in just the contest between two men, two fighters? I would say it was all right. Simply because you pretty much knew, as I highlighted in my video as to how Jake Paul would win, you pretty much knew Jake Paul was going to win the fight. However, the chance or the shot that was given to Nate Diaz was, could he outlast Jake Paul until Jake Paul gassed and then come back and win the fight? And that side of it, I believe, is what made it a pretty interesting watch. Because after that first round, you're like, okay, this is going to go by quick. That second, that third round, you're like, okay, Diaz is still here. That fourth round, you're like, okay, Diaz is still here. And it just kind of built from there. So I just want to touch on a couple of things about that fight. First of all, the Paul brothers, for whatever you want to say about them, to talk about them negatively, these two guys, from an entertainment standpoint, are extremely smart. Okay, so away from Jake Paul and fighting Nate Diaz. Also, what was going on that night was WWE SummerSlam, which is what my son was watching in the living room. And Logan Paul was the first match on that show, which took place the same night. And they were already talking about on there, I don't even know if they even brought up that his brother was fighting. But here's what we found out afterwards. Is once Logan Paul's match was done with WWE, he literally went straight to a private jet and then flew to Texas, which I believe is where the Jake Paul Nate Diaz fight was, had on his same gear that he wore in the wrestling match, and just showed up, which, when you think about it, is tremendous promotion, because this was being talked about, all over Instagram, a little bit on Twitter, X, whatever it's called now. They were talking about the fact that, Logan's going to wrestle this match for WWE. Then he's going to get on a private jet. He's going to fly to where his brother's fighting. He's going to try to be there before his brother makes the walk. And dude actually made it. So that's tremendous promotion in general. It promotes the boxing match as well as it promotes the wrestling match, because you're like, bruh, he just was at SummerSlam for real. You're at least gonna Google, you're gonna look up whatever happened on SummerSlam. So, I think it's good publicity all the way around. But let's get into this. Nate Diaz, this is what I realized after watching this fight, was, even though I still stand by my statement that going into the fight, the hype of it, what we thought it was going to be, it was still a little meh. But what I feel like is, after that fight went on, Nate Diaz was kind of, at the moment, wasn't as good as we all wanted it to be, but was kind of the perfect opponent for Jake Paul. In a sense, this was an opponent that is like, essentially kind of like a zombie, you know what I'm saying? He's going to take all of these shots and he's not going to go anywhere. Which, when you look at it from that lens, it gives Jake Paul the chance to show people that he has boxing combinations, that he has, fairly comparable striking or boxing ability, because he's got a guy that's not going to go anywhere and is just going to take those shots, and it's not going to fire back with too many combinations. At least not combinations that Jake would have to be worried about being knocked out from. So in that sense, it was good. But even more so, there was no mix-up as to who was, to use a wrestling term, who was the face and who was the heel, who was the good guy and who was the bad guy. There was a lot of people that didn't even really know, as I said in my last video, like, who is Tommy Fury? I don't know. There was a lot of people that didn't know that. So, and then Tyron Woodley has always been awkward, to put it lightly. You know what I'm saying? Tyron Woodley always had a way of going into a fight in which he should have been the good guy. He should have been the guy cheered. Everything is showing you he was probably going to be the guy cheered. Or at least he'd be comparable to like an opponent like Wonder Boy, who was obviously a nice guy that everybody likes. But Tyron Woodley always had a way of putting his foot in his mouth before the fight took place and making everybody just dislike him. And then he could never figure out why everybody disliked him. And the more and more you see this dude in videos, you find that he's just not really a likable guy. He's just not. He just wasn't a likable character, fighter, whatever you want to call him, at all. It was just something about his personality. It just didn't jive well with anybody, period. And it's kind of like the same thing with Aljamain Sterling. And I kind of find that both guys, I feel like Aljamain and Tyron Woodley are cut from the same cloth in the sense that both of them feel like that they're two very entertaining individuals based off of their personality and their mouthpiece, you know what I'm saying? Mouthpiece, how they talk, what they say, their mannerisms. And that just wasn't the case. Like both of them are awkward. Both of them always stick their foot in their mouth. Both of them never, when they should be cheered, they're never going to be cheered. Because it's almost like both men don't have a sense of who they are in a situation, how they look in a situation. They're just completely unaware of it. So both of them are always booed. No matter the circumstance, nobody is going to cheer them. Even Aljamain gets booed when he's in New York. You know what I'm saying? So it just kind of is what it is. In this scenario, Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz, it was understood everyone's going to cheer Nate Diaz. So there's no question. There's no cloud over this or anything. We're going to boo Jake Paul. We're going to cheer Nate Diaz. That's just already a given. And that made the dynamic going into the fight, into the walkouts as the fight was going on, it made it all work a little bit better than and I believe a lot of other people anticipated. The fight, going into it, I still stand by it was meh. But as you're watching the walkouts, as it's going on, it worked out a lot better simply because it was clear cut who is the guy we're all going to cheer for. As well, it was clear cut once the fight started and Jake started boxing Nate Diaz, that Nate Diaz is the underdog here. And maybe a lot of people already looked at him like the underdog going into it. But your casual fans who don't watch a lot of combat sports, just kind of buy a pay-per-view every now and then when their friends are coming over and they kind of know about one or two of the fighters, they were probably going into it thinking, this guy, Jake Paul, he's not a real fighter. He's just a YouTuber. And, Jake, he's not ready for that Diaz power, for that Diaz fury. He's going to go in there and he's going to do him bad, and 209, and this is what it's all about. Stockton, represent, your typical, like, kind of MMA, boxing, kind of casuals that didn't really know that Jake was definitely gonna box Nate Diaz's face off. That was gonna happen for sure. If you do anything, Jake Paul's gonna box Nate Diaz's face off, whole face boxed off. But what those of us who know Nate Diaz, had followed his whole career, you knew that he probably wasn't going to go anywhere. Which is why in my previous video, y'all go check it out, when I broke down the fight before it happened, I said Jake Paul is definitely going to win, but he's going to win either by decision at the end of 10 rounds, or he's going to win due to a referee stoppage, because of the fact that, he might rock Nate or something along those lines. Definitely not going to knock him out, but he might rock him enough to where a boxing referee would go ahead and stop the fight, because of just how boxing tends to work out that way. So we all kind of knew that Nate was going to be the underdog, I should say, and he was going to last. And that was what you had. But it was so, as it was going on, I'm thinking, okay, this is not what it all could have been had it been done a few years earlier. But this is about as good as it's going to get right now for a Jake Paul boxing anyone. Until Conor McGregor is free from his UFC contract, or if Dana's willing to put his money where his mouth is and let Conor go in there and box Jake Paul. So, it turned out to be as about as good as it could be. And I feel like a lot of boxing fans, there was a lot of hardcore boxing fans that just did not like this fight. And what I was kind of seeing online is on Instagram and Twitter and, even a little bit in YouTube comments. It's I don't think boxing fans really understood how a Nate Diaz fight goes or how it works. For example, when he defeated Conor McGregor, he went in there in the first round and got his face boxed off. Conor literally timed him. His timing was perfect. He jabbed him. He gave him straight, solid right shots. Solid left shots. I mean, he did some damage to Nate that first round. And Nate came out in that second round. I was like, okay, all right. And about, after the first minute and a half of the second round, Conor was gassing already. It was going to be about over. So that's kind of what I mean, is that's in a lot of Nate Diaz fights, that's kind of what he does. That first round never really quite goes as good as you want it to go, being a Diaz brother fan or a Nate Diaz fan. So, overall, I mean, I'm not going to grade the fight or nothing like that. I'm not no school teacher, you know what I'm saying? So I ain't going to grade it. But I will say it was more entertaining than I thought it was going to be going into it. However, I still stand by, had this fight been able to go down a few years ago, it would have been much bigger and probably a much better physical contest. Okay, so nevertheless, Jake Paul goes out there, he defeats Nate Diaz, and he challenges him to a MMA bout. I really don't see that going down. I don't really see that happening. I mean, it's like Jake Paul was already talking about the moment in the fight where Nate Diaz, just joking, locked him up in a guillotine. And he was like, it was really starting to get tight. It was starting to choke me. If that goes down, come on, bro. Even if Jake Paul trains to get out of that or block that, in a real fight, Nate's going to box him a little bit, and then eventually he's going to grapple him to the ground and choke him out. Or he's going to do a standing guillotine. Jake Paul's not going to be aware of a lot of things. And a good solid shot to the midsection, he bends forward, cinches up that gilly, jumping that gilly, and it's a wrap. So I don't really see a world where, I just, there's not a clear path to victory. There was a clearer path to victory for Nate Diaz to try to win in a boxing match than Jake Paul to win in an MMA fight. So I'm not sure if that'll happen regardless of the price tag they're putting on there. They're talking about they got $10 million for Nate Diaz. I mean, it's rumored on the internet that Nate was making, around $20 million for this one fight. On the low end, I've heard $15 million, between 15 and 20. 20's the highest I've heard. So I don't really know if any of that's going to happen, but pretty good though. Pretty good, pretty entertaining. Now let's shift over to the UFC in Nashville. in which in the main event, Cory Sandhagen goes out there and he defeats Rob Font with an extremely boring, grueling 5-round. And when I say grueling, I mean grueling to watch. Like, it was just like, bro, like, I might turn on the Xbox and get a few rounds in on UFC, because this is like, what we doing here? You know what I'm saying? Now, Cory Sandhagen says that he injured his right tricep. You know, I guess at the beginning of the fight, who knows? He could have came into the fight with the injury. I don't know. But he says he's got an injured right tricep, so he just kind of had to do what he had to do to win the fight. Okay. You know, yeah, I'll go along with that. Although I believe when you're looking at some of that top pressure that he had on Rob Font, there was a period where Rob was seeming to me like he was wilting under the pressure. And I'm kind of like, well, if your right tricep is holding up well enough for you to wrestle him to the ground, you know, do a good takedown, and, you know, and kind of get out of these transition spots that Rob Font was attempting. I mean, you couldn't figure out a way to deliver some left elbows or some left shots while he was on the ground to kind of get him out of there. Because to me, by the 3rd, 4th, and 5th round, Rob was kind of looking like he was still hanging in there, but he was kind of looking like he was kind of done with the whole deal. Like, you know, he was just surviving on the ground, and he was, you know, and that's kind of what I mean. Like, he was trying to scramble out of this top pressure from Cory, but he couldn't. So it kind of leads me to believe, like, Cory, bro, you couldn't, like, I'm assuming, I mean, you were doing well, but I'm assuming you couldn't post up at all with your arm and deliver the punishment with the other arms. Like, you couldn't do any of that, or you couldn't, like, I don't know. It was just really weird to me. It just seemed like, to me, there could have been a way Cory could, at least if he couldn't have got him out of there on the ground, he could have did a little bit more damage, like some elbows or some sharp cutting elbows. Like, you know, like, it was so weird to me. So, I don't know. So, now, I want to highlight something. Okay, before I highlight something about promotion, let me just say, so overall, Cory Sandhagen wins the fight. Cory Sandhagen technically should be in line to fight the winner of Sean O'Malley versus Aljamain Sterling, right? That is assuming if Sean O'Malley wins, and you would assume that Cory Sandhagen would fight Sean O'Malley as long as the time frame lines up, because I'm assuming he's going to have surgery or something done to his tricep injury, right? So with that being said, if Aljamain wins, I foresee Aljamain just going up to 145, so he's going to vacate the belt anyway. Meanwhile, on Saturday night, on Henry Cejudo's, I don't know which form his media was on. I saw it on Instagram, but he's basically saying, like, bro, you mess up your title shot. Now it's going to be me and Merab, and we're gonna fight for either the vacant title, or, you know, we're gonna fight Sean O'Malley if he's able to beat Aljamain Sterling. So, and I kind of think he's right, because Dana was extremely angry. Dana White, Daddy Warbucks, Dana White, Big Money Dana was pissed. And you know, he doesn't like these type of boring fights. If you're not one of his stars that he will look to protect, like a Conor, or, you know, maybe even an Israel Adesanya or somebody like that, Dana will go in when you put forth that type of a performance. You know, I was not impressed with your performance. You know, it's just what it is. You know, so it's like, I think he kind of messed up his title shot there. I don't think Dana's gonna be quick to give that to him. I mean, unless there's nobody else where the time frames line up. And, you know, I don't know. That was kind of a weird one. Now, let me also talk about the co-main event real quick, just real fast, and I want to touch on promotion. So, the co-main event, Tatiana Suarez goes out there against Jessica Andrade. This is more of a return to form for Tatiana Suarez. This is why I was a little apprehensive about her going into the fight picks before the fight. I picked her to win, I'd like to add. But as I highlighted, when she fought at 125, she didn't seem like she had returned to form yet. And her stand-up didn't look too well, and she just looked somewhat unsure of herself, as she should be after taking like 4 years off. And you want to know if you still got it. This was way different. This was, Tatiana Suarez was like a cage animal. You dig what I'm saying? She was like a tiger in a cage. You know what I'm saying? It was like a tiger in a cage it was like a bad zoo. You know what I'm saying? It was like a bad rinky-dink kind of zoo. You know what I'm saying? A raggedy zoo where we ain't got the best cages and facilities to contain these animals. So it just could be the tiger could get out, you know? Tiger could go tiger while you walking around. You don't know, the lion could escape. That's how Tatiana Suarez looked. Before the fight, she's pacing back and forth, back and forth. She's serious. Jessica Andrade kind of has her serious face on. Jessica Andrade does her typical drop into one knee while Bruce Buffer is announcing her. Tatiana Suarez was just pacing, ready like an animal, right? It's savage. So then we talking about, as this fight goes on, Tatiana Suarez tried her hand at striking and looked fairly comparable. You know, fairly comparable. Looked all right. Didn't look the best stand up, but looked pretty good. And then when the time came, you know, she was definitely going to handle her business on the ground. The way she took Jessica Andrade down the first time was just like she literally just grabbed that girl's ankles and twisted and moved till Jessica had no choice but to just eventually fall to the ground. You know, it wasn't like a forceful, I'm going to take you down. It was just like, okay, I'm in on you. I got your calves. I got your ankles. Do. Next thing you know, Jessica Andrade is on the ground. So it's like, but what I want to go to now, let's skip to the end of the fight. So Tatiana Suarez finishes Jessica Andrade, right? Taps her out. Let's go to the end of the fight. Tatiana Suarez, after the fight is over, after Jessica Andrade is tapped, she goes crazy because she's an animal. And she's going around the cage talking about, I'm the best, which I kind of think was kind of like a little shot at Rose. I don't know if she remembered that Rose is no longer in her weight division at the moment. But, and you know, no disrespect, I've always been a huge fan of Thug Rose. But the older Rose gets and the more time passes, Rose is kind of a weirdo, you know what I'm saying? Like, you kind of like, Rose, what do you want to do? Like, 1 minute the belt is too stressful for you, it's too stressful to be a champion, you want to give it up. Then you lose it, and then you talk about you miss it, and you want the belt back. Then you get the belt back, and you go out there and put on this horrible performance against Carla Esparza. Then afterwards, you're acting like you don't understand how MMA is scored. And you're like, well, I thought the point was to not get hurt, and I never got hurt. I just dodged her the entire time. And Pat Barry screamed outside. I don't understand how I lost the fight. Rose, you've been around since the heyday of the Ultimate Fighter. You don't know how it's scored. Anyway, I don't even want to get into her. But Tatiana Suarez is, strolling through the cage like she's looking for her next victim. Like she's going to literally grab up one of those randos that walks up to the fighters after the fight's over, and sometimes it might be a doctor, checks them, kind of touches their face, looks at their eyes, asks them if they're all right. Then you got those other weird people that are roaming in the octagon trying to keep you from climbing on top of the cage. Tatiana Suarez is like ready just to grab any one of those people and choke them out. And then grab another one and choke him out. I mean, she was like in a trance almost. And she's just walking around. And she's stalking around the octagon. And I'm like, now that's the Tatiana Suarez that I remember from back in the day. Before the 4-year-long injury. Like, that's that ish right there. That Tatiana Suarez, that's who you want to see against Zhang Weili. That one right there. You want to see that one against Zhang Weili. You know what I'm saying? You want to see that Tatiana go up a weight class and either fight Shevchenko or Shevchenko, or fight the current champion Alexa Grasso. That's what you want to see. That Tatiana. Not that Tatiana that fought the last time at 125 who was unsure. Glad she got her confidence back. Patchy Mix is out there. This is what I'm talking about. We want to see that Tatiana versus Zhang Wei Li. Sign it now, UFC. I know Zhang Wei Li got another fight coming up, and Zhang Xiaonan is still in the picture. But, bro, we want that Tatiana Suarez, Zhang Wei Li smoke. Do not give us Nan Xiaolan, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing her name, versus Tatiana, and the winner fights for the belt. We don't want that. Because Tatiana Suarez is going to go out there and do Zhang Xiaonan dirty. Do her bad. And I like Zhang Xiaonan. I'd like her to get a shot. I feel like you just boop, boop. You just skip Tatiana Suarez, have her jump over Zhang Xiaonan. She fights Zhang Wei Li. The winner of that fights Zhang Xiaonan. If I'm saying her name right, I apologize, ma'am. If you ever see this video, I love your fight, so I apologize. But I'm from a country town, so we talk different. Bro, that's what we want to see. Now, my overall point about promotion. Here's this Jake Paul versus Nate Diaz fight in which we all know one way or the other, unless the stars align, Jake Paul's going to win that fight. We already knew what the outcome was going to be. We had a pretty good idea of what the outcome was going to be in the Cory Sandhagen Rob Font fight. And so as you watch both of those play out, now I know that the Jake Paul fight might have been a little bit more exciting because of everything that swirls around a Diaz fight and a Paul fight. But overall, let's look at the promotion real quick. When it was all said and done, Dana is going in and blasting that main event. And it's his main event. And I get it that Cory might not have put on the performance that you wanted because it wasn't a good performance. And I don't know, the dude said he was injured, so I don't really know what you want from him. But I always question Dana in his promotion, or maybe it's the UFC. Maybe because Dana's so rich. I mean, he's like 450 million up. You know, he might not even really care about how good he does the promotion. But I just want to say that after that, the best thing Dana, what I believe he should have done was acknowledge that, hey, this main event wasn't the best, but you got to hand it to Cory Sandhagen, who went out there, was ready to put on a good show, got a tricep injury early in the fight, did not stop, did not tap, did not tell his corner to throw in the towel, didn't do any of that. He rested on a wrestling game plan, and he went out there and he still finished the fight. And those are the type of fighters that you have in the UFC, is even when they're injured, they're going to give you what they have. It might not be super exciting, but they're going to do the best that they can. And that's how he should have left it. And then if you want to criticize Cory, you can text him personally. Hey, Cory, this is the boss, Big Money Dana. Bro, next time throw some elbows, all right? I'm sick of these slow fights in the main event. I holla. You know what I'm saying? It just would have been something like that. Very interesting how the UFC and Dana White promote. But, that's a whole other topic that I'll get into eventually when we kind of talk about different promoters and their styles, because I just find that part of the game to be fascinating. Eventually we're going to do a little video about the Dana White style versus the Scott Coker versus some boxing promoters, your Eddie Hearns, It's going to be interesting. Nevertheless, that kind of sums up a lot of what went on over the weekend. I only touched on like 3 fights, but there wasn't a whole lot of noteworthy things that happened outside of that. Amanda Serrano went out there and did work on Heather Hardy. I mean, did work on her, but kind of is what it is, though, with that. I mean, we all knew that. So, we'll see how it all goes down. We'll see how it all plays out, the aftermath, the fallout of all of this. But I appreciate you guys for joining me for another episode of Matter of Fact MMA. And I'll check you next time. Peace.